I have written since I could hold a pencil.
When I was in 5th grade, I won a prize for a poem.
I remember most vividly starting to write in 7th and 8th grade.
I was a very verbal kid.
Mostly I was writing like error messages for websites.
Was working on an organic farm in Virginia.
I was actually painting the inside of my parents' house on a sort of charity commission.
I actually worked in Prairie Lights.
I had been farming for a number of years.
I had a job as a editor of a technology column, and I went home one evening and I said to myself, I have to write creatively tonight or I'm going to die. I mean, I can't do this anymore.
The workshop brought me here.
It was a place where I thought I would be schooled, really, in all senses of the word.
But I was absolutely certain when I was coming here that I was going to be in the company of people who were absolutely dedicated to their craft and who were talented.
You're at the one place on earth where nothing matters more than contemporary literature.
He said, the letter from Iowa's here, should I open it? And he opened it and he said, you got in, and I was so mad at him because I said, how could you make fun of me like this?
I think like most people get that call, I thought that it was, one of my friends imitating County Brothers.
Honey, when the Iowa Writers Workshop calls you and offers you money to write fiction, you write fiction. So I was like, fair enough.
And I just was sort of flabbergasted, and I came in and I was like, I got into Iowa. And both of my parents started weeping.
And at first I was terrified because it was just a thin envelope. And I opened it and I just read the first line, congratulations, we're pleased to welcome you, and I immediately fell down the stairs and hurt my back.
So I got there and had this idea that the workshop would probably be a really valuable 2 years in spite of Iowa City. I thought that Iowa City would be something to be suffered.
Okay, what am I gonna eat and who am I gonna date?
And then I came from a family, when I told them I was going to Iowa, they kept telling the neighbors that I was in school in Ohio or Idaho.
I remember walking down the street that day and just sort of waving at people. I'm like, I know in the Midwest you can be like, hey. And I was amazed as a New Yorker, you say hey, and someone would be like, hey.
The place endears itself to you so fully that it's hard to think that you have to share it with all these other people.
It was a place where the most important thing in the entire town seemed to be writing. I mean, aside from the football.
My first impression was that it was going to be kind of boring and cowtown, and it didn't turn out to be that way at all. In fact, it turned out to be perhaps the most literary, most intellectual place I've ever lived.
But I do know that I totally adored Iowa City and had a blast living there.
I was just terrified.
And it seems both sort of forbidding and exciting.
Anyone with the remotest humanity, I think, shows up there with an imposter complex. Everybody gets there feeling like the error.
Then I sort of pretty quickly realized that we were all bizarre and they were fresh off their own proverbial organic farms.
So you come and you feel as if they're going to kick you out at any moment.
The world will never scare you as much as a workshop.
The participants in a workshop take turns providing raw meat to the other beasts.
It was most often that you, as the writer, sat silently and listened to people discuss your work.
It's a medieval conquistador, seafaring, queer ghost story.
That's just information.
It was a shock. It was like having your head just banged into a wall.
I had that feeling that I think some people get when they go to college, which is finally I'm among my people. I definitely didn't get that in college, but when I came here, I felt like I'd discovered my clan.
Everyone who was in that workshop just sort of immediately became very, very intimate friends.
It was really this thrilling experience, and actually I really miss this experience of every Tuesday knowing that there was this thing that was really like the center and the focal point of the week.
Always someone will, talk too much before they share their writing because they feel insecure, and we all feel insecure in that regard. Other people will, barely talk at all and share their writing.
One day during class, I had written on an errant piece of paper, I must talk less, just to myself, and I had left it behind. And the other students had found this piece of paper that I had written that said I must talk less, and they just laughed behind my back.
I think some of the times when I received a criticism that was more calling me on something or correcting me or letting me know I was off the mark, sometimes I don't think I got it. It was said so generously.
I'm a huge Marilyn devotee. I just learned how to read from Marilyn. Like, this is, she's just an amazing reader.
I got workshopped first in the first week with a story that I thought was a slam dunk. And Marilyn's appreciation of it was just sort of almost like hold it with tenterhooks, thinking like, okay, I'm not sure this is really anywhere yet. Marilyn really asks the question, why did you write this and why is it written this way? And is the reluctance to feel that the narrator is experiencing your reluctance to feel? Like what you are writing is you. Marilyn Robinson teaches that the truest nature of writing is consciousness and understanding how the mind works on the page. That's what literature can do that no other art form can.
The other two people in the writer's workshop who I learned the most from, Bridget McPherson and Marilyn Robinson, and I think they both have a similar approach in that they believe in kind of the spiritual and the humanistic power of literature to transform lives, and they're not afraid to talk about that.
Jim is he's a quiet man, or he looks like a quiet man, and I thought he was going to be a quiet teacher, but also you just see people's genius. He could bring in like a 15-volume set of books in Greek on Monday and be like, who's going to read this for Wednesday?
Ethan has a really particular and highly structured approach to leading a workshop, and I think a lot of people, myself included, initially kind of bridled against it and found it constraining.
Ethan has a really nuts and bolts approach, which is the only way I can understand a story, and he talked about a lot of things that I had never really known how to think about before, like how a story is structured and how the structural choices affect the kind of story it turns out to be. Ethan has this amazing sort of stage whisper that he talks in class, which I love. Every time I hear it, I get chills. You have to deeply imagine.
Deeply imagine.
Deeply imagine.
Oh, but the thing you don't understand is
none of you have a child. None of you do. But you have to deeply imagine that kind of love.
But man, it was a fantastic class. In some ways, it was probably the best workshop that I had at Iowa.
Carl Klaus had an eye for the craft.
Carl always began the workshops by asking what we thought each piece was about. And I found that to be a remarkably effective way of getting at the thematic material in an essay, because it would open up the discussion already at a very high level about what we thought thematically the author was trying to convey.
Well, Justice is amazing. I mean, he's so intuitive. The way in which it is right is something that you can't describe rationally. And rational as Don was, because he's the most rational of teachers, he believed in that.
I remember Mark living that semester, and the care and the attention and the energy that he put into every class and into the discussion of everyone's writing and of every poem he taught us.
But Mark would only assign 2 poems for each week's workshop, and sometimes 3 hours would have gone by and we would still be on the first poem.
Sam Chang is somebody who's read everything.
She would create these pictures, sort of diagrams of the structure of the novel on the blackboard. And I think she has a very, like a mathematician sort of mind for structure, that she can really break down the structure of a novel, which is so daunting.
I was totally petrified of Frank.
We heard stories about how he made people cry. He made some woman faint one time in workshop because he was so brutal.
And he was a kind of a terrifying guy. He would often wear these sort of like forbidding black turtleneck sweaters.
I spent most of that workshop being so pissed off. I hated Frank's teaching style. He was mean. He was curmudgeonly. He would hold a story that he didn't like, as if he couldn't get it far enough from his body.
Frank saw writing as a challenge and sort of didn't mind putting some pressure on. Like sort of the feeling, if this is too much pressure, you don't even know what's ahead.
We all argued with him a lot, but in a way that felt really fruitful and exciting, and you could tell that he got really excited by it. We would sort of be yelling at each other back and forth, and he would just be like, this is great, you know, he just loved it. And he was always saying, it's like champagne in the air being in this class.
Frank, he goes, compose 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, and when you're done writing, you have a beer and a bump.
He would just use this phrase over and over, meaning, sense, and clarity. And that was like Frank's mantra, meaning, sense, and clarity.
Frank has a reputation of being harsh and being hard, but he was never hard or harsh on the students. It was always on the work. As harsh as he was, I don't recall him ever being wrong.
Frank was the person who taught you craft.
He was very interested in discipline. He was very interested in a commitment to craft and to the process of writing.
He's got an incredibly refined aesthetic and critical mind, somebody who could appreciate art at its highest. Like every accomplished teacher and every jazz pianist, he's got a songbook. And so he would find those points in a manuscript which would allow him to tap into the songbook of lessons.
I learned more in that class than I've learned in any other workshop I've taken. I have so much respect for Frank.
He was so one of a kind that it's impossible to follow him. And because of that, I don't even feel the need to worry about it. I know I could never be Frank. Frank was Frank. And so I'm free to be Sam.
He was just such a great presence, I really cared a lot about Frank.
We would hold hands and sort of dance around the mailbox and chant, and then drop in the envelope of whoever was sending their work off, sort of our little ritual, to send it off into the hands, on the wings of God, into the hands of the editors, who of course would, then be overwhelmed by and blown away by our fine work and publish us immediately.
I wound up selling 2 novels and having enough money to just write, and I bought a house in Iowa City and just wrote for a bunch of years.
I was teaching a class in EPB. I was teaching a nonfiction writing workshop to juniors and seniors while the book was being sold in New York.
I tried to start a novel, but novels are long, like hundreds of pages.
Is that what they are?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the genre, but they're very long.
I have been working on a novel for a couple of years and then set it aside basically for the last 6 months because I've been doing some TV writing.
It's hard for me to say I'm a writer. I usually say I'm a teacher.
I garden pretty intensively for about half the year, and I write more intensively the other half of the year.
I'm director of the workshop.
I'm the director of creative writing at Harvard University.
My poetry manuscript was just named a finalist.
My best writing comes when I'm really pissed off.
I have a certain amount of ambivalence about the whole idea of workshop, whether writing can be taught. I noticed also that after a while, if you're workshopping with the same people, you can predict what each person's going to say. This person's going to say, cut this down and make it, there's the editor, there's the person who thinks everything you're writing has to do with your mother.
It's just crazy there. Almost no relationships make it. Like if you're going married, you're leaving divorced. The social pressure is unbelievable. People get into all kinds of messes. Like it's just, people have nervous breaks. It is unbelievable, the pressure, and it's also unbelievably wonderful.
I heard later about people who would go through the workshop and stop writing the whole time they were here because they were, nervous or somebody said something that was critical and they just stopped.
There's the people who are meant for workshop, people who are not meant for workshop, and the people who are meant to go to workshop and drop out of workshop. There's just three kinds of writers.
I remember that he just kind of went nuts.
I went into the program with some trepidation that becoming a writer would surely make me the crazy person I thought I might be in my late teens and early 20s.
Ethan Cannon used to always say to us, the most important thing you're going to get out of this program is finding your readers who are going to be with you for the rest of your life.
And in a way, that's sort of the power of reading, because we all agree as readers, so actually it doesn't even matter what the teacher thinks, because if the act of reading is pleasurable, then that's all that matters.
Above all, those 2 years felt like 2 years of really rigorously learning to be an editor and to think about reading and to become a really sophisticated reader.
It gave me the tools to kind of see behind the curtain or something. Now when I read fiction, it's impossible for me not to be thinking about how it's put together. You know, what are the building blocks of this piece?
Because you're here for such a limited amount of time, I think every student comes around to sort of what the lesson is of that room. And by and large, it's a lesson that's provided by the other students.
And I think that the coolest thing about the Writers' Workshop is people who come there truly come from all different backgrounds.
It's more important for writers in a program to get to know each other and become inspiration for each other. And they'll become their own literary generation.
We wrote as if there was a shelf that held only one book.
Just the talking about writing, about the process of writing was so rewarding.
The thrill was just that I felt that it was a license to keep writing.
Nothing is clear to me in this world except when I am writing and when I am reading, and I got that there.
Of my very long education, those were the most powerful 2 years of it. And it was just that permission to do absolutely nothing but read and write and talk to people who were reading and writing. It was just heaven.